where we will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that we can move through our pain to get the kind of healthy love that we want, need, and deserve. I'm your host. I'm licensed psychotherapist, Dr. Natalie Jones. And just a quick note about listener discretion. Some of the topics that I discuss on this podcast are sensitive or triggering in nature to some of my listeners. So please note that listener discretion is advised. Um, Thank you so much for tuning in to today's podcast. I really appreciate you all being here with me today. And just a note for some of my subscribers on Apple. I guess my understanding is that Apple has now changed the way that they do things. And so it's not enough to subscribe to the podcast. You actually have to follow the podcast as well. So just FYI. So just be sure and do that so you can be notified of new podcasts that upload. Thought I'd do something a little bit different today, something I haven't done in a while, and do the podcast recording live. So I'm trying a new platform, Restream.io, where I can do the podcast live on several platforms. So I'm giving it a whirl to see how much I like it, because I actually like doing the podcast live. It gives me a chance to interact with listeners. It gives me a chance to answer listener questions that may come up while doing the podcast. So I miss doing that. I haven't done that in quite some time. And I did give the podcast a little bit of a break, but now I'm back. And so today I thought I'd give a topic, again, I'm doing a solo podcast, but I thought I'd talk about a topic in which comes up a lot with my listeners, with my clients on social media, and just even with friendships too. When you talk to people and they say, well, I've been in a relationship with a narcissist, or I've been in an abusive relationship, I've been in a relationship that wasn't good, or there were sales even with friendship, family, and so it's difficult for me to trust. They may say that, or it's trust issues or things like that is also a very common one that I hear. And I wanted to give some time to talk a little bit about that today. Why it's so difficult to trust people, especially, after a hurtful or abusive relationship. And so I did a little post on that on social media, and you know how I like to do. I kind of like to expand on social media posts that I really like, and just topics that people bring to me in general. So let me talk a little bit about trust. Trust, first of all, is the ability to be vulnerable with somebody. It is the ability to be able to depend on somebody. It is the ability to say, you know what, if I falter, I know that this person's got my back. This person can keep my secrets. This person has got me. And so that's essentially, that's my definition of what trust is. And I think it's important for each person to define what trust is to them. And I have the belief that trust is an all or nothing concept. And you may or may not agree with me, but again, I feel like it's all or nothing. Like either you trust someone or you don't. You can't say, in my opinion, is that you can't say I trust somebody a little bit, but I don't trust them at all. And maybe and I'm talking about intimate relationships here where I say, it's all or nothing. There are some relationships that, I feel like are different for you. So not everyone deserves to have the same amount of access to your life. So you might have a neighbor, you might have your church community, you might have your work crew, you might have your friends that you go out for drinks with. And that's something that's totally different when you say, these people don't deserve to have the same amount of access to you. And when someone doesn't need to have the same amount of access to you, meaning that, not everyone has the same type of relationship, of course, you're going to adjust trust accordingly. But what I'm talking about specifically here is very close, intimate relationships. And so I just want to be clear about that on this podcast. And that's why I say with very close, intimate relationships, I do feel like it's an all or nothing um, issue. It's because in order to have intimacy, I do think that trust needs to be there and present in the relationship 100%. And if you don't, then that means that you can't be vulnerable. You can't be intimate. You can only kind of be yourself some of the time. And so that's why I say that. But anyhow, I want to kind of move on and talk about why you may have difficulty with trusting others, especially a painful or abusive intimate relationship. And the first thing that I came up with is that painful trust issues from the past remain unresolved and unhealed. There are a lot of folks out there that have been hurt by somebody. They've kind of gone through a situation with somebody, a betrayal of some kind. It could have been infidelity. It could have been money issues. It could have been someone told a secret or something like that, or they said something to a mother-in-law or something like that that wasn't supposed to be shared. And so a lot of times what happens in relationships, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes when we have the inability to trust, it's because that issue remains unresolved and unhealed. And we might stay in a relationship with that person, or we might exit the relationship with that person, but it means that we never um, we didn't resolve the issue because we didn't address it. That person wasn't willing to listen to it, or that person didn't admit any sort of wrong, or we just kind of swept things under the rug and continued on. Those would be some examples of things that are unresolved. Or maybe even perhaps you might have been the type of person to just say, you know what? I'm going to look in the other direction and I'm going to just continue on with this person because this person has to be in my life and there's nothing that I could do about it. So I'm just going to let it go and do the best that I can to be in this relationship. Meanwhile, in the back of your mind, there's still this sort of lingering hurt. There's still this lingering resentment around the pain and just sort of hurt that this person's caused. But it hasn't been resolved because we just continued on, or we felt like there was nothing that we could do about it. And let me be the first person to tell you, when we have a problem in our relationships, even with people that we've been in a relationship with for a while, or people that we truly care about, it doesn't necessarily mean that the person that has hurt us or betrayed our trust in some way is always going to be willing to listen or be willing to solve the problem. That does not mean that we cannot seek closure within ourselves. And the closure that you seek within yourself is going to look different each and every time. It might look different in each and every relationship. But, you can't depend on someone to always give you some nice closure like what you would see on TV or read in a book or something like that. A lot of times there is often not the traditional closure that we seek in a relationship, so you have to seek that from within. And that doesn't mean accepting, that doesn't mean, forgetting about what someone's done to you. Closure means that, okay, I've taken a mental note of what this person has done to me. And that really hurt me. And so, whether or not you choose to stay in a relationship with that particular person, you now have to act accordingly, knowing the betrayal that was caused. And so, if that person cannot be trusted with a secret, if that person cannot be trusted with money, if there was some other sort of betrayal, then you know, or you should know rather, that there was something that was done, and now you need to adjust how you behave around that person, because you cannot invest 100% of your trust in a person that can't be trusted. Trust has to be, in my opinion, it needs to be earned. And even if there's a betrayal, it's got to be earned back. There has to be some sort of communication before you should be willing to invest 100% back into that person. Hope that makes sense. The second reason why you might have some trust issues or difficulty with trusting folks is you just have difficulty connecting with people overall. And what that might look like is a person that spends time in isolation, a person that may feel socially awkward or inept, who doesn't really have the skills or doesn't really have a lot of friends or connections in general. You're not really sure to you're not really sure of yourself. You're not really sure of the cues, the conversational cues, the emotional cues that you should be following, and so you just don't know, and it's kind of like you're sort of a fish out of water. And so connecting with people, conversing with people, starting a relationship with people is very, very difficult for you. And folks that this could be very difficult for could be folks with sensory perception disorders, folks that have had a significant amount of rejection in their lives, folks that have had a significant amount of loss or maybe even substance use for a significant amount of years, or something that sort of interrupted their ability to be able to just connect. And that connection is just like it can be a simple conversation, just a simple way to relate. And so you don't really know what to do. And so people that don't really know how to connect, they could be overly gullible, meaning that they could be easily influenced and manipulated or taken advantage of. Or you might even be the extreme, meaning that you just socially you don't like to engage, you don't trust anybody, you sort of withdraw, or you isolate, or there's a deficit in sort of starting the conversation because you just don't trust anybody. And if you're one of the folks that's gullible and you're taken advantage of time and time again, that is also something to be looked at, because over time that may also turn into a trust issue, because all you know is that when you trust somebody, all they do is hurt you or use you, and whereas you want to connect for friendship. All you're trying to do is the simple art of making a friend, and all other people may be doing, or your perception of what they're doing, is just using you or manipulating you to get their needs met. Hope that makes sense also. The third reason that you may have some difficulty in trusting other people is that you learn dishonest methods of communication from parents or family members, from your childhood. Early childhood experiences taught you that, parents or people that are close to the family or family members, they can't be trusted because they don't tell the truth, or they may exploit you, or their communication style is abusive in nature, or it's just dishonest in nature, meaning that there's always something behind the communication. In order for us to communicate with you, there has to be something that that person is getting from you in return. So, for example, and this may also be a little bit of an extreme case as well, but I did my dissertation years ago, and I had a woman that I interviewed, and the dissertation is it's a published work, so anybody can access it. But I had a woman who had a mom, and the woman had been incarcerated countless numbers of time for fraud. And I think even I had done an episode where I featured this very same woman. But anyhow, and Dr. Joy read her words on the podcast. I forget what episode that was, but she was kind enough to do the episode on that with myself and Dr. Donna Oriolo. Um, but anyhow, in that podcast, that woman talked about, my participant talked about how her mother would not communicate with her unless she wanted her to steal something for her. So her mother used her for the explicitly to steal or commit some sort of fraudulent activity and reward her with material goods. And so she talked about how her mother wouldn't talk to her, her mother wouldn't come around unless she was getting some benefit. So, in other words, that her communication had an ulterior motive. And, otherwise, if she wasn't doing something for her mother that often put her at risk of being incarcerated, then, she wasn't ever going to see her mother again. And she was very frank about that. And so that could be another a sign of, like, the dishonest method of communication from family members. There could be other methods of dishonest communication. For example, family members may communicate that abuse is a form of love. Specifically, I'm thinking about sexual abuse. Is part of manipulation again. Maybe saying that, I'm doing this because I love you, but don't tell anybody, type of thing. And so there's these mixed messages behind abusive forms of communication. Gaslighting also, is another form of dishonest methods of communication. Backhanded compliments and things like that would also be another form of mixed communication, where people say things, but then they sort of retract what they say by making a negative backhanded comment also. Okay, so the fourth one is you might have difficulty trusting your own judgment. One of the things that I found in working with folks, my clients, people in a row that uh, have been in an abusive relationship is um, part of how abuse works is sorry if I'm rambling here, but part of how abuse works is by the abuser sort of blaming you for the abuse taking place. So a lot of what my clients experience is that, when they get out of an abusive relationship, they're still in the mindset to blame themselves. And so they may have difficulty trusting themselves because they say, wow, I can't trust myself because, I'm not a good judge of character, or I picked someone in my life that abused me and hurt me, or they may start to do an evaluation of multiple relationships that they have and find that they're abusive or unhealthy. And so they may start to turn themselves inward and say, I'm the common denominator of all this abuse going on, so it must be me. And therefore, because I'm in these abusive relationships, I therefore cannot be trusted to make a decision about what's right for me. Um, thank you so much, Miss Jones. I appreciate you commenting about my wisdom. So, yeah, so, you have difficulty trusting your judgment. Let me be the first person to tell you that, hey, you can't blame yourself for being abused. You're not responsible for another person's behavior. And, we all go through this walk of life together. And so your life, it's your life. And so, of course, you're going to always be the common denominator in your life. But hey, we always make choices, and we learn about ourselves through our choices that we make. It doesn't mean that you can't be trusted. It might mean that there might be something that we want to look at in terms of the pattern of behavior. Oftentimes what I find in people that have been abused, it's not that they can't be trusted, because very often they usually have an inkling that there's a red flag, that there's, hey, something's not quite right about this person here. But however, what happens is that their brain is wired for trauma. If you've had an extensive experience in growing up in traumatic environments, there's a part of your brain that begins to normalize that. And it's not in a way that, oh, I want it. It's like, oh, okay, this is familiar. I know how to do this. I've seen this before. And so your brain is going to start filtering for that. And so that's why that tends to happen. It doesn't mean, again, that you can't be trusted. It just means that may need to be, some neuroaffective work that needs to be done to rewire your brain to flag traumatic events, abusive people, distrustful people, and not just sort of flagging that, but flagging how you react to it. If you've grown up in an abusive environment, or if you've been exposed to it for a number of years, you've more than likely been conditioned to take it. You've been conditioned to be invisible. You've been conditioned to not use your voice. And so there is a pattern of survival mechanisms that develops as a result of that. And so what would need to happen is the reconditioning, finding your voice, empowerment, and things to actually change that behavior. So I just want to be clear about that. Okay. Fifthly, your inner critic or your dialogue might cause you to view people negatively. And this could happen, especially if you have a depressive personality or you have a negative, critical, overly critical outlook on life and people in general. And if you're hypercritical, or you have a high propensity to have a negative outlook, folks that have that are more than likely going to be saying, "Hey, people just can't be trusted in general," or "Hey, this person doesn't have good intentions," or they're just going to have a lot of negative speech. And again, that could come from a variety of things. That could come from substance abuse. It can come from mood disorders. It can come from trauma. It can come from having a bad day. It can come from, again, early childhood experiences. It could come from you being in a current abusive environment. So if you're currently in an abusive environment, it's not uncommon to have a negative inner critic that is a culmination of like your abuser's voice. It could come from society's negative standards. It can come from a variety of things. So that might be another reason that you may have difficulty trusting your own judgment, is because your inner critic is negative, and so it's going to also only filter for negative information or negative affirmations of the information in which you were expecting. And so it's going to your brain is going to disregard anything that goes against that, and it's only going to filter for that negative information. If you have an anxious attachment style, this is another one. So anxious attachment style means that, you know, you have an anxious type of love. And so there is this fear that this person is going to leave you, or there's this fear that the person's love is not going to be consistent. Or there's this fear that you don't want to be alone, or there's some other fears related to attachment in the relationship. Maybe that the relationship is not going to last, and so you constantly need affirmations, you need validations, and you need just the person needs to go above and beyond to make you feel secure in order for you to kind of keep that anxiety in check, to not question the relationship, to not question that other person's feelings towards you. And, that anxiety can come from a culmination of things. It can come from upbringing. It can come from not having clear communications. It can come from having a betrayal early on in the relationship in which trust was jeopardized. But also, too, if you just have an anxious attachment style in general. So, again, more than likely that came from early childhood experiences. And so, what tends to happen when we have an anxious attachment style? One thing I should note is we tend to latch on extra tight because we need that constant security. We need that constant validation. We need those constant affirmations. And so, that may actually be looking like also to going through phones, constantly asking questions about where you've been, what you've been doing, who you've been with, what's going on, who's that person, do you love me? Those types of questions. So questions that are over the top anxious, that's where that could come from. So if you have an anxious attachment style, that is something that can be worked through. I highly recommend therapy because that's something that, again, requires you to, um, seek safety and security in yourself. It comes from a place of validating and I feel like there's something else on the tip of my tongue. Validating yourself, and just feeling very, very empowered. Learning to believe that you're going to be safe and secure and just okay, even if this relationship doesn't work out. You have enough faith in yourself that you know that you make good decisions and that you're going to bounce back on your feet. So that's that would be a way therapy can help you sort of keep that anxious attachment style in check. Um, so let's see here. I think this is six. So the sixth bullet that I have here is committing to a relationship with multiple betrayals, and then you hope for that person to change. So when you are afraid to trust somebody, and you've been in a relationship with somebody, and they committed multiple betrayals, and that betrayal could look like serial cheating. It could look like taking money. It could look like some other sort of betrayal, some sort of massive lie or betrayal. And what happens is you have decided in your mind, hey, I'm going to forgive this person and we're going to make it work. I'm going to work it out with this person. I'm going to hang in there with this relationship because I love this person and I'm not ready to let it go. And what tends to happen with that is that, again, it, things may not have been resolved. There's not a clear communication about sort of, the betrayal, but just uh, there's not a clear communication about the betrayal. Sorry, I'm dropping my mic here. But you've just made a decision based on your security. You've decided that, hey, it's better for me to just stick it out with this person, but we really haven't resolved it. We really haven't gone to therapy. We really haven't worked through things. So I still have this fear in the back of my mind that this person is going to do that. And then again, they end up proving you right, especially when there's more than one betrayal. Like, hey, there's something that happens, or even if it's not a full on betrayal, but something about just their movement, their actions, or their behavior isn't quite right. Like there's some suspicions in your mind, and they're not doing the work to sort of quell that and to turn your trust back. You are going to continue to distrust them, and maybe even sort of go beyond them and start generalizing that, right? Because you've heard people sort of make general statements or overgeneralize opinions when they have trust issues. They say, "Oh, all men are dogs," or "All women are gold diggers," or they make all these sort of general statements because they haven't healed the wound from betrayals. And what they've done is they've continued to just say, "Okay, I'm moving on," but they haven't really moved on. They haven't done the work to move on. Maybe they stayed in that relationship and continued to get burned until it finally fizzled out, or maybe they're still in that relationship. But whatever the case is, they haven't done the work to resolve that relationship wound. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but whenever there's a betrayal, whenever there's a relationship hurt, whenever there's something that has caused you to feel an intense amount of pain or even just a little amount of pain, there needs to be some work done to overcome and resolve that. There's no way to sort of shortcut and work around that. If you do, it's still going to be in the back of your mind, and it's still going to be work that you have to do on the back end. And you're going to end up working more to try to just be at peace with not doing it. So I hope that makes sense. Um, there's also, lastly, what I'll mention. This is the last one I'll mention is that, a lot of times what I'm finding more and more is that people don't know how to date or make connections. And I know I spoke about this earlier in the relationship, but this comes up because people expect others to sort of read their minds or have the same sort of expectations in relationships, right? So you expect people to have the same level of integrity or honesty without clearly expressing your expectations. So you don't have discussions around your values or what your expectations of trust are, but you just sort of kind of think that, hey, everybody knows what it means to trust. Everybody knows what it means when to be honest. Everybody knows these kind of things. So there's like this golden rule in your mind, which people should live by. And when they don't follow that rule, it's like, oh my God, they should have known better. Like, what rule book of life were they following? And so I say that to say that it's really important that regardless of what your relationship is or who your relationship is with, it's very important to really define your expectations of what it means to trust someone, what it means to be honest with someone, and what it means to have respect and integrity in the relationship, because everyone is going to have a different definition in their mind, or they're going to have different standards in their mind, and you won't know until there's some sort of rupture. So for example, there's some people that believe that if you omit telling someone something, then that is a lie. There are others who believe that if you don't tell someone something, you didn't lie about it. And so that's a very simple it's simple, but it's complicated, right? And it's like it's very easy to see how people can sort of misconstrue that rule and behave accordingly, and that could blow up and become a very big thing in your relationship. And then before you know it, you feel like you can't trust people because they didn't tell you something in which you felt like, okay, you need to be sharing these things with me. These are my expectations. Well, we didn't know that until it's too late. So it's very important to connect with people and talk with people about what your expectations are around trust, and not just give it away freely. It has to be earned. Well, I think that's all that about that, and I hope that you found it useful. And I'd like to hear from you. Tell me if you have, is trust something that you have difficulty with in your relationships? Specifically, if you've been in a hurtful or abusive relationship, is it something that you feel like, hey, I just can't like trust people now, that even if that relationship's over, I can't trust people now, I can't move on. Hey, I got trust issues, Dr. Jones. And if trust issues are a challenge for me, can you, reach out and tell me a little bit about why they're a challenge for you and what you find challenging about trusting people? Anyhow, thank you so much for hanging in there with me. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, make sure you follow too in order to be updated for new podcast episodes. If you need to reach me, a date with darkness at gmail.com. You can reach out and ask questions. You can also find me on my website, drnataliejones.com, and see me around on social media. Thank you so much. And be sure also, too, if you want to hang out with other like-minded folks that are looking for support and willing to give you support from abusive relationships and healing from abusive relationships, rather, a date with darkness Facebook group is the place to be. And until next time, you guys take care and be well and stay safe out there and put on your mask.